The Ming Dynasty, officially the Great Ming, was the ruling dynasty of China from 1368 to 1644 following the collapse of the Mongol-led Yuan dynasty. The Ming dynasty was the last imperial dynasty of China ruled by Han Chinese. Although the primary capital of Beijing fell in 1644 to a rebellion led by Li Zicheng, numerous rump regimes ruled by remnants of the Ming imperial family, collectively called the Southern Ming, survived until 1662. The Hongwu Emperor attempted to create a society of self-sufficient rural communities ordered in a rigid, immobile system that would guarantee and support a permanent class of soldiers for his dynasty. The empire's standing army exceeded 1 million troops, and the navy's dockyards in Nanjing were the largest in the world. He also took great care breaking the power of the court eunuchs and unrelated magnates, infaufing his many sons throughout China and attempting to guide these princes through the Huangming Zuxun, a set of published dynastic instructions. This failed when his teenage successor, the Jianwen Emperor, attempted to curtail his uncle's power, prompting the Jingmen campaign, an uprising that placed the Prince of Yan upon the throne as the Yongle Emperor in 1402. The Yongle Emperor established Yan as a secondary capital and renamed it Beijing, constructed the Forbidden City, and restored the Grand Canal and the primacy of the imperial examinations and official appointments. He rewarded his eunuch supporters and employed them as a counterweight against the Confucian scholar bureaucrats. 1. Zheng He led 7 enormous voyages of exploration into the Indian Ocean as far as Arabia and the eastern coasts of Africa. The rise of new emperors and new factions diminished such extravagances. The capture of the Zhengtong Emperor during the 1449 Tumu crisis ended them completely. The imperial navy was allowed to fall into disrepair while forced labor constructed the Liaodong Palisade and connected and fortified the Great Wall of China into its modern form. Wide-ranging censuses of the entire empire were conducted decennially, but the desire to avoid labor and taxes and the difficulty of storing and reviewing the enormous archives at Nanjing hampered accurate figures. Estimates for the late Ming population vary from 160 to 200 million. But necessary revenues were squeezed out of smaller and smaller numbers of farmers as more disappeared from the official records or donated their lands to tax-exempt eunuchs or temples. Hygiene laws intended to protect the coasts from Japanese pirates instead turned many into smugglers and pirates themselves. By the 16th century, however, the expansion of European trade, albeit restricted to islands near Guangzhou such as Macau, spread the Columbian exchange of crops, plants, and animals into China, introducing chili peppers to Sichuan cuisine and highly productive maize and potatoes, which diminished famines and spurred population growth. The growth of Portuguese, Spanish, and Dutch trade created new demand for Chinese products and produced a massive influx of Japanese and American silver. This abundance of specie remonetized the Ming economy, whose paper money had suffered repeated hyperinflation and was no longer trusted. While traditional Confucians opposed such a prominent role for commerce and the newly rich it created, the heterodoxy introduced by Wang Yongning permitted a more accommodating attitude. Zhang Juzheng's initially successful reforms proved devastating when a slowdown in agriculture produced by the Little Ice Age joined changes in Japanese and Spanish policy that quickly cut off the supply of silver now necessary for farmers to be able to pay their taxes. Combined with crop failure, floods, and the Great Plague, the dynasty collapsed before the rebel leader Li Zicheng, who was himself defeated shortly afterward by the Manchu-led 8 banner armies who founded the Qing dynasty. History. Founding. Revolt and rebel rivalry. The Mongol-led Yuan dynasty ruled before the establishment of the Ming dynasty. Explanations for the demise of the Yuan include institutionalized ethnic discrimination against Han Chinese that stirred resentment and rebellion, overtaxation of areas hard hit by inflation, and massive flooding of the Yellow River as a result of the abandonment of irrigation projects. Consequently, agriculture and the economy were in shambles, and rebellion broke out among the hundreds of thousands of peasants called upon to work on repairing the dikes of the Yellow River. A number of Han Chinese groups revolted, including the Red Turbans in 1351. The Red Turbans were affiliated with the White Lotus, a Buddhist secret society. Zhu Yuanzhang was a penniless peasant and Buddhist monk who joined the Red Turbans in 1352. He soon gained a reputation after marrying the foster daughter of a rebel commander. In 1356, Zhu's rebel force captured the city of Nanjing, which he would later establish as the capital of the Ming dynasty. With the Yuan dynasty crumbling, Competing rebel groups began fighting for control of the country and thus the right to establish a new dynasty. In 1363, Zhu Yuanzhang eliminated his arch-rival and leader of the rebel Han faction, Chen Yuliang, in the Battle of Lake Poyang, arguably the largest naval battle in history. Known for its ambitious use of fire ships, Zhu's force of 200,000 Ming sailors were able to defeat a Han rebel force over triple their size, claimed to be 650,000 strong. The victory destroyed the last opposing rebel faction, leaving Zhu Yuanzhang in uncontested control of the bountiful Yangtze River Valley and cementing his power in the south. After the dynastic head of the Red Turban suspiciously died in 1367 while a guest of Zhu, there was no one left who was remotely capable of contesting his march to the throne, and he made his imperial ambitions known by sending an army toward the Yuan capital Dadu in 1368. The last Yuan emperor fled north to the upper capital Chengdu, and Zhu declared the founding of the Ming dynasty after razing the Yuan palaces in Dadu to the ground. The city was renamed Beiping in the same year. Zhu Yuanzhang took Hongwu, or Vasily Marshal, as his era name. Reign of the Hongwu Emperor. Hongwu made an immediate effort to rebuild state infrastructure. He built a 48 kilometers long wall around Nanjing, as well as new palaces and government halls. The history of Ming states that as early as 1364 Zhu Yuanzhang had begun drafting a new Confucian law code, the De Ming Lu, which was completed by 1397 and repeated certain clauses found in the Old Tang Code of 653. Hongwu organized a military system known as the Waisuo, which was similar to the Fubing system of the Tang dynasty. In 1380 Hongwu had the chancellor Hu Huaiyang executed upon suspicion of a conspiracy plot to overthrow him. After that Hongwu abolished the chancellery and assumed this role as chief executive and emperor, a precedent mostly followed throughout the Ming period. With a growing suspicion of his ministers and subjects, Hongwu established the Jinyuai, a network of secret police drawn from his own palace guard. Some 100,000 people were executed in a series of purges during his rule. The Hongwu emperor issued many edicts forbidding Mongol practices and proclaiming his intention to purify China of barbarian influence. However, he also sought to use the Yuan legacy to legitimize his authority in China and other areas ruled by the Yuan. He continued policies of the Yuan dynasty such as continued requests for Korean concubines and eunuchs, Mongol-style hereditary military institutions, Mongol-style clothing and hats, promoting archery and horseback riding, and having large numbers of Mongols serve in the Ming military. Until the late 16th century, Mongols still constituted 1 in 3 officers serving in capital forces like the Embroidered Uniform Guard, and other peoples such as Jurchens were also prominent. He frequently wrote to Mongol, Japanese, Korean, Jurchen, Tibetan, and Southwest frontier rulers offering advice on their governmental and dynastic policy, and insisted on leaders from these regions visiting the Ming capital for audiences. He resettled 100,000 Mongols into his territory, with many serving as guards in the capital. The emperor also strongly advertised the hospitality and role granted to Chinggisid nobles in his court, southwestern frontier. In Qinghai, the Salar Muslims voluntarily came under Ming rule, their clan leaders capitulating around 1370. Uyghur troops under Uyghur General Halabashi suppressed the Miao rebellions of the 1370s and settled in Changde, Hunan. Hui Muslim troops also settled in Changde, Hunan after serving the Ming in campaigns against other aboriginal tribes. In 1381, the Ming dynasty annexed the areas of the southwest that had once been part of the Kingdom of Dali following the successful effort by Hui Muslim Ming armies to defeat Yuan loyalist Mongol and Hui Muslim troops holding out in Yunnan province. The Hui troops under General Mu Yang, who was appointed governor of Yunnan, were resettled in the region as part of a colonization effort. By the end of the 14th century, some 200,000 military colonists settled some 2 million mu of land in what is now Yunnan and Guizhou. Roughly 500,000 more Chinese settlers came in later periods. These migrations caused a major shift in the ethnic makeup of the region, since formerly more than half of the population were non-Han peoples. Resentment over such massive changes in population and the resulting government presence and policies sparked more Miao and Yao revolts in 1464 to 1466. Which were crushed by an army of 30,000 Ming troops joining the 160,000 local Guangxi. After the scholar and philosopher Wang Yongming suppressed another rebellion in the region, he advocated single, unitary administration of Chinese and indigenous ethnic groups in order to bring about sinification of the local peoples. Campaign in the Northeast. After the overthrow of the Mongol Yuan dynasty by the Ming dynasty in 1368, Manchuria remained under control of the Mongols of the northern Yuan dynasty based in Mongolia. Nagishu, a former Yuan official and a Urarangkai general of the northern Yuan dynasty, won hegemony over the Mongol tribes in Manchuria. He grew strong in the northeast, with forces large enough to threaten invasion of the newly founded Ming dynasty in order to restore the Mongols to power in China. The Ming decided to defeat him instead of waiting for the Mongols to attack. In 1387 the Ming sent a military campaign to attack Nagishu, which concluded with the surrender of Nagishu and Ming conquest of Manchuria. The early Ming court could not, and did not, aspire to the control imposed upon the Jurchens and Manchuria by the Mongols, yet it created a norm of organization that would ultimately serve as the main instrument for the relations with peoples along the northeast frontiers. By the end of the Hongwu reign, the essentials of a policy toward the Jurchens had taken shape. Most of the inhabitants of Manchuria, except for the wild Jurchens, were at peace with China. In 1409, under the Yongle Emperor, the Ming dynasty established the Nurgan Regional Military Commission on the banks of the Amur River, and Yishiha, a eunuch of Haxijorcan origin, was ordered to lead an expedition to the mouth of the Amur to pacify the wild Jurchens. After the death of Yongle Emperor, the Nurgan Regional Military Commission was abolished in 1435, and the Ming court ceased to have substantial activities there, although the guards continued to exist in Manchuria. Throughout its existence, the Ming established a total of 384 guards and 24 battalions in Manchuria, but these were probably only nominal offices and did not necessarily imply political control. By the late Ming period, Ming's political presence in Manchuria has declined significantly. Relations with Tibet. The Mingxi, the official history of the Ming dynasty compiled by the Qing dynasty in 1739, states that the Ming established itinerant commanderies overseeing Tibetan administration while also renewing titles of ex-Yuan dynasty officials from Tibet and conferring new princely titles on leaders of Tibetan Buddhist sects. However, Terrell V. Wiley states that censorship in the Mingxi in favor of bolstering the Ming emperor's prestige and reputation at all costs obfuscates the nuanced history of Sino-Tibetan relations during the Ming era. Modern scholars debate whether the Ming dynasty had sovereignty over Tibet. Some believe it was a relationship of loose suzerainty that was largely cut off when the Jiajing emperor persecuted Buddhism in favor of Taoism at court. Others argue that the significant religious nature of the relationship with Tibetan lamas is underrepresented in modern scholarship. Others note the Ming need for Central Asian horses and the need to maintain the tea horse trade. The Ming sporadically sent armed forays into Tibet during the 14th century, which the Tibetans successfully resisted. Several scholars point out that unlike the preceding Mongols, the Ming dynasty did not garrison permanent troops in Tibet. The Wanli Emperor attempted to re-establish Sino-Tibetan relations in the wake of a Mongol-Tibetan alliance initiated in 1578, an alliance which affected the foreign policy of the subsequent Manchu Qing dynasty and their support for the Dalai Lama of the Yellow Hat sect. By the late 16th century, the Mongols proved to be successful armed protectors of the Yellow Hat Dalai Lama after their increasing presence in the Amdo region, culminating in the conquest of Tibet by Gushi Khan in 1642. Establishing the Koshut Khanate, reign of the Yongle Emperor. Rise to power. The Hongwu Emperor specified his grandson Zhu Yunwen as his successor, and he assumed the throne as the Jianwen Emperor after Hongwu's death in 1398. The most powerful of Hongwu's sons, Zhu Di, then the militarily mighty, disagreed with this, and soon a political showdown erupted between him and his nephew Jianwen. After Jianwen arrested many of Zhu Di's associates, Zhu Di plotted a rebellion that sparked a 3-year civil war. Under the pretext of rescuing the young Jianwen from corrupting officials, Zhu Di personally led forces in the revolt. The palace in Nanjing was burned to the ground, along with Jianwen himself, his wife, mother, and courtiers. Zhu Di assumed the throne as the Yongle Emperor. His reign is universally viewed by scholars as a second founding of the Ming dynasty since he reversed many of his father's policies. New capital and foreign engagement. Yongle demoted Nanjing to a secondary capital and in 1403 announced the new capital of China was to be at his power base in Beijing. Construction of a new city there lasted from 1407 to 1420, employing hundreds of thousands of workers daily. At the center was the political node of the imperial city, and at the center of this was the Forbidden City, the palatial residence of the emperor and his family. By 1553, the outer city was added to the south, which brought the overall size of Beijing to 6.5 by 7 kilometers. Beginning in 1405, the Yongle Emperor entrusted his favored eunuch commander Zheng He as the admiral for a gigantic new fleet of ships designated for international tributary missions. Among the kingdoms visited by Zheng He, Yongle Emperor proclaimed the kingdom of Cochin to be its protectorate. The Chinese had sent diplomatic missions overland since the Han Dynasty and engaged in private overseas trade, but these missions were unprecedented in grandeur and scale. To serve as 7 different tributary voyages, the Nanjing shipyards constructed 2,000 vessels from 1403 to 1419, including treasure ships measuring 112 meters to 134 meters in length and 45 meters to 54 meters in width. Yongle used woodblock printing to spread Chinese culture. He also used the military to expand China's borders. This included the brief occupation of Vietnam, from the initial invasion in 1406 until the Ming withdrawal in 1427 as a result of protracted guerrilla warfare led by Le Loi, the founder of the Vietnamese Le dynasty. Tumu Crisis and the Ming Mongols. The Oirat leader Sntisi launched an invasion into Ming China in July 1449. The chief eunuch Wang Zhen encouraged the Zhengtong emperor to lead a force personally to face the Oirats after a recent Ming defeat. The emperor left the capital and put his half-brother Zhu Kuiyu in charge of affairs as temporary regent. On 8 September, Essen routed Zhengtong's army, and Zhengtong was captured, an event known as the Tumu Crisis. The Oirats held the Zhengtong emperor for ransom. However, this scheme was foiled once the emperor's younger brother assumed the throne under the era named Jingtai. The Oirats were also repelled once the Jingtai emperor's confidant and defense minister Yu Qian gained control of the Ming armed forces. Holding the Zhengtong emperor in captivity was a useless bargaining chip for the Oirats as long as another sat on his throne, so they released him back into Ming China. The former emperor was placed under house arrest in the palace until the coup against the Jingtai emperor in 1457 known as the Resting the Gate incident. The former emperor retook the throne under the new era named Tianshun. Tianshun proved to be a troubled time and Mongol forces within the Ming military structure continued to be problematic. On August 7, 1461, the Chinese general Cao Qin and his Ming troops of Mongol descent staged a coup against the Tianshun emperor out of fear of being next on his purged list of those who aided him in the Resting the Gate incident. Cao's rebel force managed to set fire to the western and eastern gates of the imperial city and killed several leading ministers before his forces were finally cornered and he was forced to commit suicide. While the Yongle emperor had staged 5 major offensives north of the Great Wall against the Mongols and the Oirats, the constant threat of Oirat incursions prompted the Ming authorities to fortify the Great Wall from the late 15th century to the 16th century. Nevertheless, John Fairbank notes that it proved to be a futile military gesture but vividly expressed China's siege mentality. Yet the Great Wall was not meant to be a purely defensive fortification. Its towers functioned rather as a series of lit beacons and signaling stations to allow rapid warning to friendly units of advancing enemy troops. Decline and fall of the Ming dynasty. Later reign of the Wanli Emperor. The financial drain of the Imjin War in Korea against the Japanese was one of the many problems, fiscal or other, facing Ming China during the reign of the Wanli Emperor. In the beginning of his reign, Wanli surrounded himself with able advisors and made a conscientious effort to handle state affairs. His Grand Secretary Zhang Juzang built up an effective network of alliances with senior officials. However, there was no one after him skilled enough to maintain the stability of these alliances. Officials soon banded together in opposing political factions. Over time, Wanli grew tired of court affairs and frequent political quarreling amongst his ministers, preferring to stay behind the walls of the Forbidden City and out of his officials' sight. Scholar officials lost prominence in administration as eunuchs became intermediaries between the aloof emperor and his officials. Any senior official who wanted to discuss state matters had to persuade powerful eunuchs with a bribe simply to have his demands or message relayed to the emperor. The Bozhou rebellion by the chiefdom of Bozhou was going on in southwestern China at the same time as the Imjin War. Role of eunuchs. The Hongwu emperor forbade eunuchs to learn how to read or engage in politics. Whether or not these restrictions were carried out with absolute success in his reign, eunuchs during the Yongle emperor's reign and afterwards managed huge imperial workshops, commanded armies, and participated in matters of appointment and promotion of officials. Yongle put 75 eunuchs in charge of foreign policy. They traveled frequently to vassal states including Annam, Mongolia, the Ryukyu Islands, and Tibet, and less frequently to farther-flung places like Japan and Nepal. In the later 15th century, however, eunuch envoys generally only traveled to Korea. The eunuchs developed their own bureaucracy that was organized parallel to but was not subject to the civil service bureaucracy. Although there were several dictatorial eunuchs throughout the Ming, such as Wang Zhen, Wang Ji, and Lu Jin, excessive tyrannical eunuch power did not become evident until the 1590s when the Wanli Emperor increased their rights over the civil bureaucracy and granted them power to collect provincial taxes. The eunuch Wei Zhongxian dominated the court of the Tianqi Emperor and had his political rivals tortured to death, mostly the vocal critics from the faction of the Donglin Society. He ordered temples built in his honor throughout the Ming Empire, and built personal palaces created with funds allocated for building the previous emperor's tombs. His friends and family gained important positions without qualifications. Wei also published a historical work lambasting and belittling his political opponents. The instability at court came right as natural calamity, pestilence, rebellion, and foreign invasion came to a peak. The Chongzhen emperor had Wei dismissed from court, which led to Wei's suicide shortly after. The eunuchs built their own social structure, providing and gaining support to their birth clans. Instead of fathers promoting sons, it was a matter of uncles promoting nephews. The Haitian Hui Society in Peking sponsored the temple that conducted rituals for worshipping the memory of Gang Tai, a powerful eunuch of the Yuan dynasty. The temple became an influential base for highly placed eunuchs, and continued in a somewhat diminished role during the Qing dynasty. Economic breakdown and natural disasters. During the last years of the Wanli era and those of his two successors, an economic crisis developed that was centered on a sudden widespread lack of the empire's chief medium of exchange, silver. The Portuguese first established trade with China in 1516, trading Japanese silver for Chinese silk, and after some initial hostilities gained consent from the Ming court in 1557 to settle Macau as their permanent trade base in China. Their role in providing silver was gradually surpassed by the Spanish, while even the Dutch challenged them for control of this trade. Philip IV of Spain began cracking down on illegal smuggling of silver from New Spain and Peru across the Pacific through the Philippines towards China, in favor of shipping American mined silver through Spanish ports. In 1639, the new Tokugawa regime of Japan shut down most of its foreign trade with European powers, cutting off another source of silver coming into China. These events occurring at roughly the same time caused a dramatic spike in the value of silver and made paying taxes nearly impossible for most provinces. People began hoarding precious silver as there was progressively less of it, forcing the ratio of the value of copper to silver into a steep decline. In the 1630s, a string of 1,000 copper coins equaled an ounce of silver, by 1640 that sum could fetch half an ounce, and, by 1643 only 1/3 of an ounce. For peasants this meant economic disaster, since they paid taxes in silver while conducting local trade and crop sales in copper. Recent historians have debated the validity of the theory that silver shortages caused the downfall of the Ming dynasty. Famines became common in northern China in the early 17th century because of unusually dry and cold weather that shortened the growing season, effects of a larger ecological event now known as the Little Ice Age. Famine, alongside tax increases, widespread military desertions, a declining relief system, and natural disasters such as flooding and inability of the government to properly manage irrigation and flood control projects caused widespread loss of life and normal civility. The central government, starved of resources, could do very little to mitigate the effects of these calamities. Making matters worse, a widespread epidemic, the Great Plague in late Ming dynasty, spread across China from Zhejiang to Henan, killing an unknown but large number of people. The deadliest earthquake of all time, the Shanxi earthquake of 1556, occurred during the Jiajing Emperor's reign, killing approximately 830,000 people. Rise of the Manchu. A Jurchen tribal leader named Nurhaci, starting with just a small tribe, rapidly gained control over all the Manchurian tribes. During the Japanese invasions of Joseon Korea in the 1590s, he offered to lead his tribes in support of the Ming and Joseon army. This offer was declined, but he was granted honorific Ming titles for his gesture. Recognizing the weakness of Ming authority north of their border, He united all of the adjacent northern tribes and consolidated power in the region surrounding his homeland as the Jurchen Jin dynasty had done previously. In 1610, he broke relations with the Ming court, and in 1618 demanded a tribute from them to redress 7 grievances. By 1636, Nurhaci's son Huang Taiji renamed his dynasty from the later Jin to the Great Qing at Mukden, which had fallen to Qing forces in 1621 and was made their capital in 1625. Huang Taiji also adopted the Chinese imperial title Huangdi, declared the Chong era, and changed the ethnic name of his people from Jurchen to Manchu. In 1638 the Manchu defeated and conquered Ming China's traditional ally Joseon with an army of 100,000 troops in the Second Manchu invasion of Korea. Shortly after, the Koreans renounced their long-held loyalty to the Ming dynasty. Rebellion, invasion, collapse. A peasant soldier named Li Zicheng mutinied with his fellow soldiers in western Shanxi in the early 1630s after the Ming government failed to ship much-needed supplies there. In 1634 he was captured by a Ming general and released only on the terms that he returned to service. The agreement soon broke down when a local magistrate had 36 of his fellow rebels executed. Li's troops retaliated by killing the officials and continued to lead a rebellion based in Runyang, central Henan province by 1635. By the 1640s, an ex-soldier and rival to Li, Zhang Shanzong, had created a firm rebel base in Chengdu, Sichuan, while Li's center of power was in Hubei with extended influence over Shanxi and Henan. In 1640, masses of Chinese peasants who were starving, unable to pay their taxes, and no longer in fear of the frequently defeated Chinese army, began to form into huge bands of rebels. The Chinese military, caught between fruitless efforts to defeat the Manchu raiders from the north and huge peasant revolts in the provinces, essentially fell apart. Unpaid and unfed, the army was defeated by Li Zicheng, now self-styled as the Prince of Shun, and deserted the capital without much of a fight. On April 25, 1644, Beijing fell to a rebel army led by Li Zicheng when the city gates were opened by rebel allies from within. During the turmoil, the last Ming emperor hanged himself on a tree in the imperial garden outside the Forbidden City. Seizing opportunity, the 8 banners crossed the Great Wall after the Ming border general Wu Songui opened the gates at Shanhai Pass. This occurred shortly after he learned about the fate of the capital and an army of Li Zicheng marching towards him. Weighing his options of alliance, he decided to side with the Manchus. The 8 banners under the Manchu Prince Dorgan and Wu Songui approached Beijing after the army sent by Li was destroyed at Shanhai Guan. The Prince of Shun's army fled the capital on the 4th of June. On 6th of June, the Manchus and Wu entered the capital and proclaimed the young Shunzi emperor ruler of China. After being forced out of Shen by the Qing, chased along the Han River to Wuchang, and finally along the northern border of Jiangxi province, Li Zicheng died there in the summer of 1645, thus ending the Shun dynasty. One report says his death was a suicide, another states that he was beaten to death by peasants after he was caught stealing their food. Despite the loss of Beijing and the death of the emperor, the Ming were not yet totally destroyed. Nanjing, Fujian, Guangdong, Shanxi, and Yunnan were all strongholds of Ming resistance. However, there were several pretenders for the Ming throne, and their forces were divided. These scattered Ming remnants in southern China after 1644 were collectively designated by 19th-century historians as the Southern Ming. Each bastion of resistance was individually defeated by the Qing until 1662, when the last Southern Ming emperor died, the Yongli Emperor, Zhu Yulong. The last Ming princes to hold out were the Prince of Ningjing Zhu Shigi and the son of Zhu Yihai, the Prince of Lu Zhu Honghuan, who stayed with Koxinga's Ming loyalists in the kingdom of Tungning until 1683. Zhu Shigi proclaimed that he acted in the name of the deceased Yongli Emperor. The Qing eventually sent the 17 Ming princes still living in Taiwan back to mainland China, where they spent the rest of their lives. In 1725 the Qing Yongzheng Emperor bestowed the hereditary title of Marquis on a descendant of the Ming dynasty imperial family, Zhu Zhilian, who received a salary from the Qing government and whose duty was to perform rituals at the Ming tombs. The Chinese plain white banner was also inducted in the 8 banners. Later the Qianlong Emperor bestowed the title Marquis of Extended Grace posthumously on Zhu Zhilian in 1750, and the title passed on through 12 generations of Ming descendants until the end of the Qing dynasty in 1912. The last Marquis of Extended Grace was Zhu Yuxun. In 1912, after the overthrow of the Qing dynasty in the Xinhai Revolution, some advocated that a Han Chinese be installed as emperor, either the descendant of Confucius, who was the Duke Yansheng, or the Ming dynasty imperial family descendant, the Marquis of Extended Grace.